Keeping him honest tonight, a reminder from the president's man in charge of ferreting out and accusing the president's enemies of mortgage fraud.
If somebody in two primary residences, that is not appropriate, and we will refer it for criminal investigation.
So that was Bill Pulte, who has made mortgage fraud referrals to the Justice Department in the cases of New York Attorney General Letitia James, Federal Reserve Governor Lisa Cook, Democratic lawmakers Adam Schiff and Eric Swalwell. His warnings seem especially apt tonight because of a new piece of reporting from the investigative team at ProPublica. The headline, Trump's own mortgages match his description of mortgage fraud, records reveal. Quoting now from the article, in 1993, Trump signed a mortgage for a Bermuda-style home in Palm Beach, Florida, pledging that it would be his principal residence. Just 7 weeks later, he got another mortgage for a 7-bedroom marble-floored neighboring property, attesting that it too would be his principal residence. Instead, the two houses, which are next to his historic Mar-a-Lago estate, were used as investment properties and rented out. Now, to be clear, then, Citizen Trump was never charged with mortgage fraud back then, and the statute of limitations has long since passed. But there's no statute of limitations on double standards, even when there are Fed governors to try and force out of their jobs and former prosecutors of his, like Letitia James, to go after. So she, you will recall, won a large civil case against the president and his family business for a different flavor of fraud, falsely inflating the value of his properties. Joining us now, one of the ProPublica reporters on the mortgage story, Justin Elliott. So it's kind of remarkable reporting. So would the mortgages that you and your colleagues reported ever have raised eyebrows prior to the administration accusing the president's enemies of the exact same thing?
That's a great question. I mean, my guess is no, because I think this is a story not about Trump actually committing mortgage fraud. It's a story about Trump committing what Trump calls mortgage fraud. Mm-hmm. You know, I've spent a lot of time in the last couple of weeks on the phone with, sober-minded mortgage lawyers, and they say that there's actually often legitimate reasons to have two of these mortgages, and that, often there's some kind of side communication with the lender, the bank, and they know about it. And even when there might actually be something wrong in the paperwork, it's not usually prosecuted. But
what would be some of the reasons for having?
For example, the most mundane one would be if you bought a house and then moved for another job in a few years, and then bought a second home and then kept the old home. So now suddenly you have paperwork out there, two mortgages that say you have a principal residence. The other is just the fact that these tend to be kind of boilerplate forms the banks use, even if they sort of really know what's going on. I mean, we don't actually know the full story of what happened in this Trump case, but what we are very clear about is that Trump himself and Bill Pulte, the guy kind of running point on this administration, have repeatedly said that having two of these mortgages where you say the home is going to be principal residence at the same time is on its own evidence of fraud and should be investigated by the Justice Department. This is why Trump, in his own words, fired Lisa Cook. Right. And so these two mortgages we found from Palm Beach, he got these 7 weeks apart.
And he did not live in either of them?
We found no evidence he lived in either of them. We found rental listings from the Palm Beach newspapers in the 90s renting them out. I actually called the real estate agent on one of those who's still active. She told me on the record these were rented out from day one. Trump
You tracked down the real estate agent from the 1990s?
Yeah, she's actually still active. She's was one of the founding members of Mar-a-Lago, actually.
Wow, okay.
So there's very little doubt about whether Trump lived in these properties, even though these documents that you can get from the Palm Beach clerk.
So what would have been his reason for purchasing them, to rent them out? Or what was going on in his finances at the time?
It's interesting. At the time, the early 90s, he'd just gone through a series of very high-profile bankruptcies. A lot of his casinos and hotels had kind of gone belly up. And he was in the process of turning Mar-a-Lago from a private residence into the club that we all know it as today. These two homes are right next door to Mar-a-Lago. So his realtor said that he sort of wanted to choose his own neighbors, essentially, kind of like expand the perimeter of the property. But nevertheless, fact remains, he has two of these mortgages. He signed both of them personally. They both say he's supposed to move in 60 days. He signed them 7 weeks apart. And, Bill Pulte, the guy who's been running point on this, we reached out to him because he said these things should be referred criminally, and he didn't respond.
And how did the White House respond?
The White House did not respond to the aspect of it that this fits Trump's definition of mortgage fraud. They said that this is not fraud because it was the same lender, so the lender had to know. And to be clear, most of the lawyers we talked to thought that most likely it also wasn't fraud. You'd need to do a sort of deeper inquiry to see all the records. Right. But again, this is a standard they've been using to fire a Fed governor And Tish James was indicted on something similar
Right.
to this. So the latest reporting is they're trying to re-indict Tish James, talking about going after a couple members of Congress. So it's been, they've been using this as a, quite serious thing.
Yeah, fascinating reporting, Justin Elliott. Thanks very much.
Out front now, Robert Federacci, one of the ProPublica reporters who broke the story. And Robert, I really appreciate your time. I mean, it is obviously incredible to hear the reporting that you and your team are putting out in the context of what Bill Pulte has put out there. What did you find, as you've been going through so many mortgages, including those of other members of his administration, when you got to Trump's mortgages?
Yeah, so first a little bit of context. The Trump administration has been using this allegation to go after its political enemies. They have said clearly that claiming more than one primary residence is evidence of mortgage fraud. And they've used it to charge Tish James. They've used it to try to oust the Fed governor. What experts say is that this is a really low bar for mortgage fraud. It's usually more extreme circumstances that result in actual charges. But this is the bar the Trump administration has set. And what we found is that Donald Trump did precisely this thing. He got one primary residence mortgage for a home near Mar-a-Lago, and then several weeks later did the same thing for a neighboring home. And in both of those mortgages, he pledged that this would be his principal residence. And in reality, there's no evidence he ever lived there at all, let alone made it his primary home.
In either one of the houses?
Either one.
Okay. So how does this then compare to the investigations or cases in some of these situations against Trump's political enemies? Obviously, you mentioned some of them there, but Letitia James, Lisa Cook, Adam Schiff, and also Eric Swalwell.
They're incredibly similar. I mean, look at the Lisa Cook example. President Trump tried to fire her. She's, a Fed governor. This is typically an independent entity. President Trump has wanted to bring interest rates down, and so he's been trying to get control of the Fed. And so they tried to fire her, and he wrote a letter to her in doing so, and he specifically cited the fact that she had two principal residence mortgages within several weeks of each other. I think in her case it was 2 weeks.
Yeah.
What we found is that President Trump, before he was president, did the exact same thing. In his case, I think it was 6 or 7 weeks apart. And he specifically noted the short duration between the two mortgages as evidence that, at worst she was criminal, and at best she was so reckless she shouldn't be trusted to do her job. And again, we found that he did something extremely similar.
Yeah, I mean, the parallels are pretty incredible. There is a response from the Trump Organization to CNN. They have a response to your reporting. And in part, they say each mortgage expressly states that the lender may waive any occupancy requirement. It would make no logical sense for the lender to issue two mortgages in such close succession while supposedly requiring both properties to serve as the borrower's principal residence. That's a commentary, I guess, that could apply in any of the situations you were just discussing. I understand you actually called Trump directly to respond. What did he say to you?
Right. Whenever you're writing about someone, it's obviously really important to try to hear their side of it. I called him directly. I got the first question out, asking him whether the examples he's pointed to as instances of mortgage fraud were similar to what he had done himself. There was a long silence, and then the call was ended. He hung up. So we didn't get a response from him, but the White House did share that response. And, I think what's important to point out is we are not saying that he committed mortgage fraud. What our reporting has found is that what he did is what he's been saying is mortgage fraud.
Right. And of course, there's no evidence that it is mortgage fraud, right? It's just the consistency of what they have claimed it to be in the case of others. Robert, thank you so much for sharing your reporting with us.